Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out on a cold February night. I look forward to spring when I don't have to wear my long johns under my nice tops, but here we are. So I appreciate you coming out. Tonight is a program that's called The World in Your Library. And this program's been brought to you with a close partnership between the Maine Humanities Council and the Margaret Chase Smith Foundation and us. So it's really a wonderful program because we are one of 13 libraries that was chosen to present on issues of journalism. And I think this is one of the hot topics of our time. And as we sit here, even listening to our wonderful speaker, crazy things are going on out there, and we're all trying to make sense of it all. So hopefully we will gain some really wonderful insight into how to process information and how journalism is used in our world, because our world is here in our library, but we want to give you tools to go out and process what's happening. So on your seats, you'll see these blue cards. These are evaluation cards, and these are very important for me to turn back to the Humanities Council, because that helps them see that we're doing our job to get you folks in here and participate in how they can make their programs better. And I can't recommend them enough. Without these partnerships, I couldn't do programming like this. So take a minute. There's pens and pencils on the goodies table, and you get a cookie too. And just fill out as much as you want, and I'll make sure that the right people get them, and we can continue bringing great programming to you. So those are all the administrative stuff. Let me tell you a little bit about our speaker. And forgive me for reading, but your credentials are so long, I couldn't possibly have done this without my notes. So Bill Nemitz is here. A journalist from Maine since 1977. He began his column in 1995. I'm sure you're all familiar with him. Mm-hmm. His work has taken him 3 times to Iraq, twice to Afghanistan, where he was embedded with members of the Army National Guard. He was in Belfast, Northern Ireland in 1998 for the referendum on the Good Friday peace talks. He was in Manhattan after 9/11. He was on the Gulf Coast in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and in Haiti following 2010 earthquake. Mr. Nemitz is the past president of the Maine Press Association. For many years he taught journalism at St. Joseph's College in Maine, which I'm very familiar with. I worked in the library there for a few years. Wonderful college.
I stole a lot of photocopies from you.
Yeah. It is. It's great. He also served on the Board of Trustees for the Salt Institute for Documentary Studies and currently sits on the board of the Saco River Theater. In 2004, the Maine Press Association named Mr. Nemitz Maine Journalist of the Year for his reporting on the Army National Guard 133rd Engineering Battalion in Iraq. In 2007, he received Distinguished Service Award from the New England Newspaper Association. 2015, he was inducted into the Maine Press Association Hall of Fame. Mr. Nemitz lives in Buxton with his wife, Andrea. They have 5 children and 2 grandchildren. And that was the easiest part for me. Clearly, his credentials bring him to us as an expert, as someone who's been there and done it, and I am so proud to invite you and welcome you to Berwick Library.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I bring you greetings from Northern York County. Don't get down this way nearly enough. I want to cover a lot of ground tonight, but really what I want to focus on primarily is what Sharon referred to, these kind of crazy times in which we find ourselves, and how consuming the news these days is far, far different than it was when we were all younger. And I'm going to start by going, just for the sake of contrast, to go back to that day in 1977, my first day as a reporter for the Central Maine Morning Sentinel. They brought me in, they sat me down, I was shaking like a leaf. And I sat down to a desk, and it had a big desktop Underwood typewriter, not electric, it's a big old clunky one. That was my typewriter. Next to that was a stack of, this size copy paper, about that thick. Above that was a pair of scissors, and next to that was a glue pot. And so when we said cut and paste back then, that's really what we did. I mean, you'd be typing your story on deadline, you'd get a phone call, it's the quote that you've been waiting for, you'd take out of the typewriter, cut it, paste in the quote, and that's so some pages were this long, some pages were that long. And that was really the way we did it. And it didn't seem at all odd back then because, that's how I'd always done anything, working for the college newspaper, whatever. That was the way you did it. And then strange things started happening. Good things. Around 1981, they told us that they were taking out the typewriters and we were all going to get computers. And once you get over the learning curve, for us, these were basically just very basic word processors. But it was like manna from heaven. No more glue stick, no more scissors, no more copy paper. And so we very quickly adapted to that. But that was really just a tool with which we could write. It really wasn't anything more than that. And then I came down to Portland in 1983 and proceeded to become a city editor in the early 90s. And I remember one day, one of our reporters put out a message to everybody, a guy by the name of Eric Bloom, who now is the communications guy for Hannaford. A lot of my journalist friends are doing things like that these days. But he was offering all of us on the staff a chance to participate in a lunchtime seminar that he was putting on. And the title of the seminar, which sounded like something right out of the land of Oz, was Computer Assisted Reporting. We're saying, what's that? You don't have to go up to the no offense, you don't have to go up to the library anymore. All right. This thing, the internet was upon us. And I think back, and that was not that long ago. I mean, that was, close, it'll be 30 years ago, but no, yeah. So, but it feels like yesterday. And so we dove into that and rolled up our sleeves and said, this is fantastic, It started with, Nexus, Lexis searches, and it was pretty clunky, and it was cumbersome, and it wasn't always that easy to find stuff. But just the idea that without leaving your desk, you could go on to this computer and extract information for your stories was absolutely revolutionary for us. And naturally, we all dove right in. At the same time, something very insidious was happening. And that was other people were liking this too. And I'm using the uppercase we here in the newspaper industry, completely failed at that point to recognize not just the potential for this new technology in terms of our information gathering, but also the potential that it obviously we now know held as the engine really for an economy, the future of commercial activity. And as a result, we looked at the internet and thought, well, it's kind of cool. And then they started telling us, you know how you should go to these websites? Well, you can have your own. And we thought, no, we're too busy. And then finally we realized, well, we should probably do this because it's fun and we can brag about it. And so we created our first rudimentary websites and then thought, well, why don't we tell our readers about it? And why don't we just give it to them? Make it kind of a value-added thing to the newspaper product for those who were doing that kind of thing. And I think that was a critical point in the history of newspapers, and one that if we could go back and do over again, and if we could have gone back and immediately started training people, in the idea that you pay, just like you pay for the printed paper, you're going to have to pay for this too. And by the time we came to that realization that this product in and of itself had to have some commercial value, it was too late. Entire readerships across entire markets had become completely accustomed to getting this for free. And there's nothing worse than giving something free to people for 10 years and then saying, oh, by the way, we're going to make you start paying for this now. And we've been navigating that ever since. So in that sense, the internet has really got a ton to do with what I will talk about a little bit here tonight is the demise of the newspaper industry. And we're struggling right now to try to come up with ways to offset that. The biggest problem, of course, people think it's circulation, but it really isn't. The biggest problem, the worst body blow that the internet dealt us was Craigslist. Because once Craigslist became popular and other similar sites, our classified pages disappeared. And those were our money makers. Everybody paid for every one of those little ads. And when they disappeared, it was a crucial blow. And as I said, we haven't recovered since. So what happened? Everybody flocks to the internet and everybody decides they'll get news from us on the internet. They'll get news here, there, everywhere from the internet. And for the first, I would say 10, maybe 15 years, it was a pretty good deal. I mean, you could pretty much consume all of your news for free. But then particularly over the past 10 years, I would say, it's suddenly become very nefarious. And all of a sudden, what used to be a fairly easy transaction, and that is, I go on the internet, I get my news, and that's it, became a much more complicated proposition. I go on the internet, now I have to find my news, because there are so many, many options out there. And even if I'm not looking for news, if I'm on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, other social media, it's getting thrown at me all the time. So news consumption suddenly became a challenge unto itself. And that's really what I want to focus on tonight, because there's a lot of angst, I think, out there when it comes to getting news and believing news. And now, particularly with the emergence of President Trump dealing with fake news. And I don't think I can go 2 or 3 hours each day without hearing that term, if not sooner. It's become kind of the rallying cry for a lot of people on both ends of the political spectrum. One side says this is fake, the other side says that is fake. So the first thing I think we need to do when we decide to examine fake news is define it. There have been some surveys done that show people, depending on where you are in the political spectrum, your definition of fake news could be vastly different from someone else's. It basically skews, and I'm not being political, this is just what the data shows, but it basically skews from people who see fake news as something that is demonstrably false, to the other end of the spectrum where people see news with which they disagree, news that doesn't fit their particular values or their comfort zone is automatically fake news. That line skews from liberal to conservative. So you see more of this concentration at the conservative end, that if I don't like it, then it's fake. That's not to say it doesn't exist at the other end, but it's more prevalent there. So I went looking for a good definition for fake news, and I found one. This guy by the name of John Bushman, who's the Dean of University Libraries at Seton Hall University. And I think he really nailed it, where he describes fake news as information, some true and some false, that is meant to be misleading. In other words, embedded in a fake news story, there can be facts, but it's the context and the presentation of those facts that can skew it. News, it's used to mask a situation or distort data in order to deceive or manipulate. It's vague or ambiguous and not entirely accurate. It's information that appeals to prejudices and emotions like fear, anger and frustration. We'll give a tip of the hat to the Russians on that one, but that, stuff that's designed to get people riled up. And finally, and this is my favorite, an attempt to discredit reality. I think he really nailed it on that one. But as I said, fake news, it depends on whom you ask, as to what it is. The University of Oxford just last year did a study. It was called their Computational Propaganda Project. And what they did was but this goes back to the election, the US election. And I went with them because I thought, well, they're over in Britain. They're just watching. So I like that. And they looked at they looked at a core group of about 13,500 politically active US Twitter users. In addition to that, they looked at 48,000 public Facebook pages. And what they were examining was, what are the external websites that these people are sharing? And they broke them up into groups like conservative media, Trump supporters, resistance would be the far left, women's rights, military guns, whatever. And this was based on the prevalence of likes and things that they were doing on their Facebook. And they found that the Trump support group consumes the highest volume of junk news. And they defined junk news this way. This is what they were looking for, was junk news. And that it was based on breaching at least 3 of 5 different criteria. A few of them, for example, are professionalism, bias, credibility, things like that. And they found that when using those metrics, the Trump support group consumes the highest volume of junk news sources on Twitter and spread more junk news sources on Twitter than all the other groups combined. And they looked at Facebook, and again, there was a skew in terms of, because basically the more conservative you went, the more overwhelming the number of sites that were considered junk news that were being spread around. So this does skew politically. None of this surprises me, frankly, because I'm an opinion writer, so I get it from everyone. And I have found over the years that by far the more pushback, and it's also because I certainly lean liberal in my politics, and so I'm much more apt to tick off people on the right than I am on the left. But I do find, and that's fine, and I welcome those responses, and sometimes I get into some really fascinating dialogues with these people. But I have found that when it comes to their rebuttal information, that I find that a lot of it is just not factually based. And a lot of it reflects just a basic misunderstanding of how the news works and how newspapers are structured. I'll give you a quick example. Just yesterday, I got an email from the president of a rod and gun club, and it was blistering. And it was I should have brought it, but it was in reference to the story you, directed at me, did on February 2nd, and how one-sided it was, and how this is so typical of you people, you never go get the other side. And I'm thinking, guns? February 2nd? This is not ringing a bell. So I went back and checked. I had a column that day, but it had nothing to do with guns. So I checked further. And we had a letter to the editor that it involved, they were trying to, expand their area. And it was one of those gun club versus local residents thing. And it was one of the local residents who wrote in. And so I wrote the guy back and I said, first of all, it wasn't me. It's not my story. Secondly, I think what you're referring to is a letter to the editor. And letters to the editor, by definition, are one-sided. I mean, we don't go that's not what it's an opportunity for those people to speak to the world. And I said, you're more than happy to do that too. Send us a letter. But as I sent the email, I thought, this is part of the problem here. People, they think they saw something, like my name over this, and they didn't. And they think that everything in the newspaper is a story, when it isn't. It could be a story. It could be my column, which admittedly is a little confusing because it runs in the news page, but it's marked. I mean, traditional newspaper readers will look at what I do and say, yeah, that's a column. Or it can be on the editorial and opinion pages. So there are all different kinds of choices as to what is in the newspaper. But what I've found with these folks is that it plays right into a phrase that's bandying its way about these days called confirmation bias. And that really, I think, is what's at the root of a lot of the problems we have with internet consumption of news. The dictionary defines confirmation bias as bias that results from the tendency to process and analyze information in such a way that it supports one's pre-existing ideas and convictions. In other words, if you see something that plays into your belief system, you are much more likely, number one, to believe it, and number two, to share it, than if you're not. If it's something that conflicts with those things, well, there's a good chance you're going to call it fake news. And I came across a guy, a doctor by the name of Shahram Heshmat. He writes in Psychology Today. And he refers, and I think he's right, he basically reduced confirmation bias to the phrase wishful thinking. And he says, this error that we all commit, by the way, this is not just a sin of one side or the other. And I'll tell you a little story about that in a minute. He said, this error leads the individual to stop gathering information when the evidence gathered so far confirms the view or prejudices that one would like to be true. In other words, you get to that point and you stop. Once we have formed a view, he says, we embrace information that confirms that view while ignoring or rejecting information that casts doubt on it. Confirmation bias suggests that we don't perceive circumstances objectively. We pick out those bits of data that make us feel good because they confirm our prejudices. Thus, we may become prisoners of our own assumptions. I'll give you an example. When I was a young reporter, one of the first stories I ever did, I got a call from this guy up in Benton, and he had this invention. He wanted me to come see it. I said, okay. I will preface this by saying I am not the most scientifically educated person in the world. I'm a word person, okay? If you look at my college transcript, you'll find that I took a couple of science courses that I had to, like plant propagation. So I admittedly am not scientifically based, although I like to think that over 40 years of journalism, I know more about science now than I did then. This guy had created and was marketing a thing called the friction furnace. And he had one in his window of this dilapidated little storefront in Benton. And I don't have the story anymore, but basically this thing spun around, and he convinced me that this friction furnace produced more heat than fuel, okay? In other words, it takes just a little kind of couple of drops of oil and it will heat your house for a week, And you just got to pay for the, which was a critical factor. You got to pay for that, the electricity. Anyway, I go back and I am just over the moon, I not only want to buy one, but I also think this is a great page one story. Wait till people hear about this, We just got over the Arab oil embargo. People are going to go out of their minds And fortunately, I had an editor by the name of Tim Blagg, who is scientifically rooted. And he started laughing. And the more he laughed, the more pissed off I got. It's like, what are you talking about? And he kept sitting me down trying to explain why that's not how it works. You can't create energy. And he's doing all of, the typical rudimentary scientific formulas for me. Bottom line, the story never ran. And to this day, he lives down in Greenfield, Massachusetts now. He retired about 3 years ago. And I just bumped into someone, an old friend, mutual friend, who he crossed paths with about 5 years ago. He says, yeah, I saw Tim in Boston recently. I says, oh, how's he doing? He says, good. Yeah, he told me this story about you in a furnace. You know? So he's still telling the story. So I figure I better tell it too. But that was, what's interesting about that is that my confirmation bias was in full bloom that day. I wanted this to be true. And what was also crucial is our newspaper, the Little Morning Sentinel, had the necessary checks and balances in place to make sure that story never saw the light of day. And that was in the form of this editor who said, no, that's not true. This was pre-internet, pre-everything. So it just shows that we all have these things, and what we need to do is find and rely on checks on our confirmation biases. I think part of that is recognizing them. We're all biased. You know, if anybody here doesn't think he or she is biased, I suggest you get in a conversation with a stranger. We'll see where we're at a half hour from now. We all have this. So number one, we need to identify them, and number two, we need to figure out ways to overcome them and to basically, as Dr. Hejmat says, protect ourselves from them, because they're going to hurt us in the long run. So I'm going to, if you could pass out that photo with the caption, I'm going to have you take a look at something that went viral. I'll bet some of you, how many people are on Facebook? Okay, well then maybe you saw this. It was a few years ago.
This one?
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry that the photo quality is not great. And what you see, the type that you're going to see under it is the type that appeared under it when this thing went viral on Facebook. This first surfaced around September of 2015. And within a few months, this photo was everywhere. And I'll just read through the caption here. A wolf pack, and look at the photo as I'm reading. The first three are old or sick. They give the pace to the entire pack. If it was the other way around, they would be left behind, losing contact with the pack. In case of ambush, they would be sacrificed. Then come 5 strong ones. You can see them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The front line. In the center are the rest of the pack members, then the 5 strongest following. Last is alone, the alpha. He controls everything from the rear. In that position, he can see everything, decide the direction. He sees all of the pack. The pack moves according to the elder's pace and help each other, watch each other. And now you're all supposed to go, oh. That's your confirmation bias right there. And you know, if you looked at the comments under this thing on Facebook, it's like, oh my goodness, people are just, you know, going on and on. Why can't we be that way? You know, they're arguing this. You can turn this into an argument for subsidized senior housing. I mean, there are all kinds of places you can go with this, and they did. And then the arguments start. You know, and so they're all fighting over their interpretations of this photo. And here's the problem. It's not true. The photo was taken by a guy named Chadden Hunter and featured on the BBC documentary Frozen Planet in 2011. This is the original caption. A massive pack of 25 timber wolves hunting bison in the Arctic Circle in northern Canada. In midwinter in Wood Buffalo National Park, temperatures hover around minus 40 degrees centigrade. The wolf pack, led by the alpha female, travel single file through the deep snow to save energy. The size of the pack is a sign of how rich their prey base is during the winter when the bison are more restricted by poor feeding and deep snow. The wolf packs in this national park are the only wolves in the world that specialize in hunting bison 10 times their size. They have grown to be the largest and most powerful wolves on Earth. That's the original caption. It's a little bit different. But wait, there's more. someone else took this and said, well, this was another researcher by the name of David Meck, and he is the author of Alpha Status, Dominance, Division of Labor in Wolf Packs. So this guy knows wolf packs. And he climbed in saying that they're all wrong. He says labeling a high-ranking wolf alpha, he says in natural wolf packs, the alpha male or female are merely the breeding animals, the parents of the pack, and dominance contests with other wolves are rare, if they exist at all. Thus, he says, calling a wolf an alpha is usually no more appropriate than referring to a human parent or a doe deer as an alpha. Any parent is dominant to its young offspring, so alpha adds no information. Why not refer to it as the female parent, the breeding female, the matriarch, or simply the mother? So even the documentarian had it wrong. Basically, what you're looking at is mom leading the kids through the snow. But Facebook is rife with these things, and they're all feel good. You know, we all look at them and we all go, or we might look at things and our heads explode. But whenever I see something like this on Facebook, and we'll get to this too in a minute, you know, I always want to go, my first question is where did it come from? Where did it originate? And sometimes you think you know where something originated. Like in this case, you could go back to the BBC film. But no, that's not quite. That's where the photo originated, but you can peel it back another layer and say, what is the information true? So it can become a time-consuming endeavor, you know? And you can drill pretty deep on these things sometimes. And I must confess, sometimes I do, and not always with satisfying results. So I want to do something. If any of those of you who have something to write with, I just want you to keep track of your answers. I'm going to read some things to you. Does anybody need a pencil or? Okay, there's a group called the News Media Alliance based in Washington, and it is what it's a group of about 2,000 media organizations, and its reason for being is to protect and cultivate the health of the media in these kind of troubled times. So they listed, they took the top fake news stories from 2018, and they mixed them in with some things that are true. So I'm going to read you essentially 15 kind of headlines, and just put a number for each one, and then put a T or an F next to it, okay? And after each one, as you listen to it, mark something down, and then I'll, I don't know, I guess I'll do it as we go through, okay? So here's number one. President Trump said Amazon is bankrupting the U.S. Postal Service. Okay? How many people think it's true?
Wait, the fact that he said it or that it is?
The fact that he said it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not that it is.
Okay.
Yeah. President Trump said Amazon is bankrupting the U.S. Postal Service. True? False. Did not happen. Well, he said some terrible things about Amazon and Jeff Bezos, but he never said that. He did not.
Did he tweet it?
No. Here's number two. Emma Gonzalez, the Parkland shooting survivor, remember her? Ripped up the Constitution for a photo shoot. Anyone? Anyone think that's true? How many true? Ooh, you're good. That's false. That was actually, by the way, these stories, these fake news stories did go out, okay? So I'm not saying some people say they heard it, you very well might have, because this one about Emma went viral. And what happened was she was holding up a document. If I recall, it wasn't even the Constitution. And then somebody photoshopped the photo and had her going like that. And that went all over on mostly, the conspiracy websites and that kind of thing. So that one was false too. The United States has more mass shootings than Australia, Canada, China, England, Finland, France, Germany, Mexico, Norway, and Switzerland combined. Has more than those combined. True? How many think true? Oh boy, this is a very discerning group. That's right, it's true. It's true. Here's another one. President Trump named Judge Jeanine Pirro a top pick for the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, I know we live in crazy times because normally you would say, no way, but consider. So anyway, Judge Jeanine, top pick for the U.S. Supreme Court. True? Not true. Wow, you guys, you're going to score really high on this. Melania Trump was the first lady to visit troops in a combat zone. This was reported. I remember it. First lady to visit troops in a combat zone. True? No. Anyone true? You think it's true? I'm sorry. But I applaud your courage. A GoFundMe campaign set up to raise money for construction of a U.S.-Mexico border wall raised more than $7 million. True. Okay, how many say that's true? Okay, I saw two heads no. How did you know it's true? You're right.
It just sounds like I remember when it was happening.
Okay. Do you remember where you read it? Do you remember?
It's in the Portland Sunday, Portland Press Herald.
I rest my case. Okay, so you remember, you both reacted so immediately. So there you're making a connection, number one, with having read it, and number two, with having read it from a credible news source. So.
The article is that they had to give it all back.
Well, now we're going to have to check. A Texas law requires government contractors to swear they will not boycott Israel. A Texas law requires government contractors to swear they won't boycott Israel. True? That's true. A person was hospitalized after an Apple AirPod earbud exploded in her ear. Hospitalized. True? Anyone? False. I just kept thinking about the phones that caught fire on planes and say, well, if that can happen, why not? That's right. That's right. Refugees to America brought in, here's a good one. Refugees to America brought in more government revenues than they cost over the last 10 years. They brought in more government revenues than they cost. Meaning they came to the United States as refugees, and in the 10 years since they've been here, they have contributed more revenue to the government than they have cost the government. Yes, right. True? Okay, good. A few more. Pope Francis declared that gun owners can't call them, quote, can't call themselves Christian. I think this is actually, I meant to check today because you're right, it's false. But I think the quote applies to something else. And I think this is where you get into manipulation, where he said that, and I can't for the life of me remember who he said it about.
Was it the death penalty?
It might have been. Yeah, maybe that was it. And so somebody took one and juxtaposed it with another, and you had a fake story. A woman died after contracting a brain-eating, this is kind of like the supermarket tabloids. A woman died after contracting a brain-eating amoeba after using tap water in her neti pot. I was afraid someone was going to ask me what a neti pot is. It's a kind of a disgusting device that you use to clear out your nose.
Oh, that's right, yeah. And
She died after a brain-eating amoeba. It's true. It actually happened. This is why they tell you to use distilled water. It is, believe me. A couple more. A small group of migrants demanded that their asylum claims be processed or they be given $50,000 each to return home. A small group of migrants demanded, grant us asylum or give us each $50,000 to go home. True or false? How many think true? It's true. Here's another one. A man sued this was reported. The question is, was it true or not? A man sued the state of Alabama for the right to own slaves as permitted in a document from 1865. True or false? That is false. But think about that one. Now, where would that have originated? That's not something that would have originated on the right. That's something that would have originated on the far left, trying to, discredit someone in the South. Some absentee ballots were returned to...
Was that false?
That was false. That's correct. Some absentee ballots were returned to Georgia voters for being, quote, undeliverable, close quote. I think a lot of us remember that, not too long ago. More than 50,000 dead people were included on Florida's voter rolls in November of 2018.
I hope it's false.
False. But it sure sounds true, doesn't it? So that's it. And I am embarrassed to say I forgot. When you do this online, a thing pops up at the end and tells you whether you're a genius or an idiot. But I think we're mostly geniuses here because I was very impressed with how many you got right. So I want to just get into a little bit about what is the state of our news marketplace right now, because consumption of news is at like an all-time high. Partially because you can't avoid it. You're being bombarded with it. But also because for those people who are so inclined, there are just so many different opportunities, ways to get news. You can log on to pressherald.com, which I hope you all do, or better yet, buy a copy of the paper. That's even better. And that's a direct relationship that you have. And we're not here in Berwick, but where we are. We're local. On the other hand, you can go to the other extreme and you can have news aggregator sites send you your news for you. There's a new one I think it's called smartnews.com. They're just starting to advertise. And I thought, well, that's interesting. They're claiming not to be biased and, all that. So I went looking. I wanted to know, who are they really? And it took some digging, but sure enough, they're based in Japan. And it's all, a click-based business model. And their ability to discern what you like or dislike is probably scaringly accurate based on the algorithms they use once you give what you're doing, what they want, basically. And this is the real scam that I think this is. They want access to you. And because everything you do these days online is monetized in one way or another, whether you realize it or not. So when you sign up for Smart News, you're basically giving them a key to your door, and they can come in and they can watch everything you do online. Now, their algorithm will decide, and this plays right into the confirmation bias, they're going to send you news you like, or news that you've requested from certain websites. But at the same time, what they're really in it for is to take all that data that they're gathering about you and sell it and sell it and sell it and sell it and sell it. So I'm skeptical of these sites. And the only ones I'm not skeptical of are the nonprofit ones. And I'll talk about that a little at the end. The nonprofit news sites that are starting to pop up all over the place because they're trying to replace for-profit news organizations that are going out of business. But when it comes to these online aggregators, I strongly believe that their motive is mercenary and that they really just want access to your data. So I would advise care or caution in signing up with them. Last year, the Gallup and the Knight Foundation did a pretty substantial survey of 19,000 Americans, and they were trying to get closer at that question of what is the state of our news marketplace today. And sure enough, more than 8 in 10 U.S. adults said that they think that the news media are critical or very important to our democracy. I liked that. That was nice to hear. You know, I was a little surprised, but I'll take it. And they're very traditional in that view. They see the media as making sure that Americans have the knowledge they need to be informed about public affairs and to hold leaders accountable for their actions. So that's a very traditional view, First Amendment kind of view of the media. At the same time, Americans are more likely to say the media perform these roles poorly than those that say we're performing them well. And that didn't surprise me. And I'm not sure I can stand up here and disagree with that. Because I think we aren't, with some noteworthy exceptions, we are doing a poorer job than we traditionally have. And plus, the mix is much greater. There are a lot of new so-called news organizations out there that are doing a horrible job covering the news. So that's going to bring the averages down. But I think, and the other reason I think is because of the decimation of American newsrooms over the last 20 years. And I'll touch on that a little bit later too. Who's responsible for this, they asked. Whose job is it to make sure that people get an accurate and politically balanced understanding of the news? This is very interesting. 48% of the people said the media themselves are responsible for that. But at the same time, 48% said they individually are responsible for that. And that was a strikingly high number for me. I said, really? I think that's a good thing, because what it means is those people are taking ownership of their news consumption and not trusting that somebody, like we always did back when Walter was on the evening news, not trusting anymore and saying, I'm going to have to verify myself. Is it harder or easier to be a well-informed citizen? This is a good question these days because, once again, you log on, it's the universe right in front of you. Yet 58% said it's harder to be informed and only 38% said it's easier. So yes, you have that computer, but as soon as you turn it on, you're running into a buzzsaw. And so a lot of people don't want to navigate that. And they asked, are there enough sources out there to allow us to cut through bias and sort out the facts? In other words, if you're so inclined, can you go out and find the truth? Half, 50% said yes. The bad news is that a generation ago, 66% said yes. So that figure is plummeting right now. There's a lot of pessimism out there. Only 27% of the people said they're very confident that they can tell when a news source is reporting factual news versus commentary or opinion. This strikes very near and dear to me because it's what I do. And people always, if I had a nickel for every letter or email or voicemail I've gotten from people saying, I saw your column, I enjoyed reading it, but it's so one-sided. It's so biased. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's what, And it goes back to what I said earlier about people just not understanding how we all function. Now, in fairness, I do a lot of my own reporting in my columns, so I don't just, whenever possible, I'll interview the people myself and not rely on what others. So sometimes it comes across, like Sunday's column in which I wrote about our medical examiner. I did a lot of reporting on that. And that had news value because there were some revelations in that column that hadn't been made public yet. But by and large, what I do is peddle an opinion. That's it. I'll never forget first week I started my job as a columnist, Lou Urenick was our executive editor, and he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do because we're not supposed to tell you what to do. But I will give you one word of advice. And I said, what? He says, there's one phrase that you should never use in a column. And I said, what? He says, on the other hand. And I looked up, I said, yeah? He says, don't argue against yourself. You know? And he's right. He's right. Because there are times when I'd start to do that and say, no, why would I want to do that? I'm diluting my own point here. So I really understand how many people out there don't get that. But there have been other surveys where they take two statements, and one of them is like clearly opinion, and one of them is clearly news. And the numbers would blow your mind. How many people think, reverse them? I think part of it is because everybody has an opinion today. And so it's harder and harder for people to distinguish between factual statements and statements of opinion. And as a result, who was the guy, who's I talking to? I think, who was I talking to about the guy on NPR this afternoon? Yeah, Charles Sennett, who is founding a thing, founded a group called Truth to Ground Truth. Yeah, it's a great project in which it's a nonprofit thing when they're raising money for fellowships. What they're trying to do is train a new generation of young journalists. And it's a wonderful, they've got a couple of hundred fellowships so far, and they're just trying to keep that alive and have people of my generation pass on journalism do's and don'ts to those people. And he said he was on Maine, speaking of Maine, on NPR this afternoon. And one thing he said that caught my ear was, he's got all these kids and they're all they all come in and all they've been doing all their lives is blogging. And how offended they get when he says, I don't give about your opinion. And they're all so wounded. Well, that's not my opinion. Well, yes, it is. And then he has to sit down with them and explain why that's not fact. That's your opinion. It's a big problem. So this survey divided the world between two groups. One was called the knowledgeable optimists, and the other were called, it was the inattentive skeptics. The knowledgeable optimists are informed and believe it is possible to find the truth. The inattentive skeptics tend to be less informed. In other words, they don't consume as much real news, and they're more pessimistic that they can even identify the truth. They're basically not even trying. And as you might expect, these things break on both partisan and education level lines. And I'll just leave it at that, so that nobody throws anything at me. But that one didn't surprise me. Perceptions of the news media. Views of the news media, 43% of these people had a negative view of the news media, only 33% had a positive, and 23% were neutral. Today, 66% of Americans say the media is not doing a good job separating fact from fiction. In 1982, only 42% of people thought that. So everything's moving the wrong way. Media trust, if you put it on a scale of 0, the lowest, to 100, the highest, the average American now scores a 37. This makes me glad I'm going to retire. So, I mean, it's really, I'm joking, but it's true. If you're in journalism, if you've spent your whole life in it, it's very disheartening to hear those numbers. It really is.
How did they define media for that question?
I'd have to dive in. I don't have that here, but.
Well, his question might have been mine. Media, I wouldn't even know how to answer the question.
Yeah, that's
I think what they're talking about, well, what they're asking, they're news media, news organizations. And then even then it gets squishy after that, because one of these statistics shows that there was a group that said, well, I'll get to it, but it has to do with Fox News. And, you know.
I don't want to be biased.
Yeah, right.
I know where it's going to go.
No, so in other words, I think the point, I can't find it just scanning here, but basically what it was people who, only 44% of people asked could name a credible news source. And then so you take that number and then break it down, and the overwhelming number of people who identified as Republicans and answered that question when asked, okay, what's your credible news source? They said Fox News. So to them, it's credible. Now, others might not think so. So, when you get down to defining which news organizations are credible and which ones aren't, it gets difficult. How are we doing for time? I gotta keep moving here. I'm going to skip over some because this thing goes on. Americans have greatest trust in national network news and local and national newspapers to provide mostly accurate and politically balanced news. They trust cable news more than they trust internet news. That's good. I mean, that goes back. I think that's the echo of Walter Cronkite. I mean, when you turn on whether it's NBC, CBS, or ABC network news at night, there's still it still carries a voice of authority that a lot of people trust and embrace. However, that skews older because most of the young people surveyed in this thing, they don't watch TV, and they get the majority of their news from social media. So, once again, we're not all going to be around much longer. I shudder to think of what the world's going to be like in 50 years if those trends continue. And that's the biggest problem I have with the next generation is discerning what is and isn't legitimate information. Too many of them think they know what it is, and they don't. So I'm going to skip to the handouts because we're coming up on an hour here, and I want to make sure you go home with something. We'll start with the how to spot. And this is just a handy little guide because people ask me all the time, how do you spot fake news? And it's really not that hard. And I'll just run through these really quick. Starting at the top, consider the source, first of all. And that's as easy as looking up at the website, at the URL, and seeing where it came from. If it ends in .com, that's a good thing. But there are others that, there's another one that it has .co, which looks like .com but isn't, so it could be WashingtonPost.co. And you think you're looking at the Washington Post, but you're not. So that URL is critical. Huh? Yeah. There are things you can do with URL addresses to disguise them now. And the eye thinks it's seeing something, and it isn't. So it's important to watch for that. The other thing, go to the right, read beyond. Headlines can be outrageous in an effort to get clicks. What's the whole story? That, you can, most of us, I think, can spot a fictional news story pretty quickly if it has a crazy enough headline. It reminds me of the same guy on NPR this afternoon who made the point. He says, when we were in the 70s, when you were in the supermarket aisle and you looked at, world news or whatever all those tabloids were, and you saw that, Martians just landed in L.A.,
Yeah.
That's not true. And you're not, right. I used to drive to Boston with my 3 kids, and we'd stop up in South Portland. The first thing I'd do, just before we get in the car, I'd go in at the gas station and I'd buy them each one of those magazines. And then we'd go the whole ride to Boston, we'd all see who could outdo each other with the weirdest story. But, we had that reflexive reaction back then, and there's really no reason why we can't have it now. If something is just too ridiculous to believe, then you have to wonder whether it's really even worth pursuing. But to go beyond the headline, I would also say, find the keyword in that story, enough to make it discreetly identifiable from everything else, and then just plug it into Google and hit the news button on Google. If it's a legitimate story, and you're looking at it, say, in the Portland Press Herald or whatever, and then all of a sudden you see under that news feed Washington Post, New York Times, The Guardian, NBC News, if you see them starting to string up, well, then you know, okay, there's some validity to this. If, on the other hand, you do that and nothing appears, well, now you're on very thin ice. Do you remember the story recently where was it BuzzFeed that reported that Michael Cohen said that Trump told him to lie to Congress? And it was like a sensation. I was watching MSNBC that afternoon, and they went out of their minds. They couldn't believe it. And all through the evening, I kept looking at BuzzFeed's story, and I kept going to Google. Nothing. Nobody picked up on it. And then you might recall, the next day, Mueller's office, in a very unprecedented move, came out and said, that's not true. Now, we won't know, at least for now, how much of that story was correct. But even before Mueller denied it, just by clicking on Google News, I knew there was a problem with this story, because some very experienced people in New York, Washington, and elsewhere were all saying, no, we're not going to touch that story. So, right. They got caught, yeah. Because there's a competitive urge to get the story, but you got to be careful. Check the author. I do this all the time. Just Google the author's name. You'd be surprised what you come up with. Supporting sources. If they have links, click on them. Sometimes they don't go anywhere. If they don't, that's a warning sign. They dress them up with hyperlinks, the colored copy, to make it look authoritative. But if those don't take you anywhere, if they take you to La La Land, then you got a problem. Check the date. I've seen stories that were 15 years old going all over Facebook. Can you believe this? Train crash, 48 people dead. Why aren't we hearing about this? Because it happened in 1983, and somebody just repackaged it. Happens a lot. Is it a joke? Is it too... this one, anybody here read The Onion?
Yeah.
Which is a satirical news site, which is hysterically funny most of the time. But they... sometimes people take things too seriously. Back when I was a reporter for the Evening Express in Portland on April 1st, we were kind of the fun newspaper. So I would take it upon myself every April 1st to write a April 1st news story, right? And this pre-internet. And I wrote once, remember Imelda Marcos in the Philippines? Remember all of her shoes? Well, I wrote one year that she was going to open a shoe outlet on Congress Street in Portland. And it was written in straight news style, and everything. And sure enough, you feel terrible because some poor woman up in Cumberland will call me and say, can you tell me when that store's going to open? So you got, there's the point being, and I've written some spoof columns the same way, much like Art Buchwald used to do, And I wrote one once where when Angus King they were looking for an independent to run for president. And he was talking to Bill Bradley and Lowell Weicker and all these other, top politically independent people. And it was a group phone call. So I did it like that, name, quote, all the way down through. And this was back when Angus was governor. And the last line is Angus tells them, we need a slogan. We need a slogan to get people excited about this if we're going to do it. And here in Maine, I've got a lot of success with Maine is on the move. Remember that? Maine is on the move. And then he says, how about something like USA is underway? and all the other guys love it to the point where they all say, you're our guy. You're the guy we're going to put up for president. And that was it. And USA is underway. And I got 3 calls the next day saying, how did you get on that line? Did they invite you? Check your biases. We've been through that. I don't think that means so much suspend your biases, is at least be aware of them. And, be your own best devil's advocate. It's so important. It's so easy to look what's happening with Jesse, I forget his last name, this singer. You look at the way people jumped on that story, and there's a lot of confirmation bias going on there. Now, I don't know. I don't know. The jury's still out on that story, but I have a feeling that when that is all said and done, it's not going to be pretty. And I think part of the problem is Well, obviously, if somebody generates that kind of a fraudulent story, it's their problem. But it becomes a lot of other people's problems when they jump on board too quickly and don't wait for things to be investigated, especially criminal things. It's why we've suspended reader comments on certain types of stories, because it gets too ugly and it gets too crazy. Anything involving a death, anything involving a sexual assault, there's a list of things that we have now where we disable reader comments on them. Because we had a guy who got hit on one of those biker rides for charity up near Sydney a year or two ago. And everybody was, I forget which side was at fault now. I think everybody was going after the guy in the pickup truck who hit the biker. And it turned out it was the total opposite. The biker veered out in front of the guy, and there was nothing he could do. So you're the guy that hit this biker. Your life is already destroyed by the fact that you just killed someone on the highway. And then you got to go online and watch all these people condemn you for something you didn't do. So I wrote a column about that and said, we got a problem here. And much to the newspaper's credit, right after that is when we instituted this new policy. It started marking some things out of bounds. And finally, ask the experts. Ask a librarian. Go look for more authoritative sources if it's that important a story. I should also note, if you look at the fine print here on the bottom, it says this was put out by the International Federation of Library Associations. So this isn't, this is not newspaper or generated.
And this actually is something that we've had at the computer station, our public access.
The same thing?
For a few years.
Oh, good, good.
I might have taken it out to use the little plastic thing to put your picture in it, but we'll put it right back.
All right. And finally, we can pass out the last thing there. And this is another way to if you're so inclined, to determine whether something is factual or not, is simply to go to one of these, I put 4 of them here, fact-checking websites. And there are some really good ones. The 4 that I list here are factcheck.org. They'll be on the paper. PolitiFact, Snopes.com. Snopes are the ones who uncovered the wolf thing. That was their work.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they just kept digging and digging on that. I really like Snopes because Fact Check and PolitiFact, and then at the bottom, Washington Post Fact Checker. They're the ones that do the Pinocchios. Most of those 3 are kind of oriented more toward politics, and they don't cover some of the crazier stuff that you see out there, particularly on social media. But Snopes does. Snopes does a very good job of going after everything. So if you keep those in your bookmarks, and you're reading a story, and you say this can't be true, just click on one of those, and you do the search on it, and you'd be surprised how often it'll pop up there, and it gives you the full explanation. I'm going to close by making one pitch, and that is, I didn't get into this because time didn't permit, but newspapers per se is no news to you. We are a struggling breed right now. Total circulation in 1990 for daily newspapers was just over 62 million, both daily and Sunday. 62.5 million on Sunday, 1990. Newspaper circulation today, Sunday is 33, and daily is 30. Less than half. Monthly unique visitors to the top 50 newspaper websites was 8 million in 2014 per month, and 11.5 million in 2017. So that's good. That means that, there's a lot of people getting their news just by going online, but it doesn't begin to offset the circulation losses. In other words, there's a lot of people out there who used to read the newspaper in one form or another, and they are no longer doing it. And that's much to our detriment. Advertising revenues for newspapers in this country fell from $49.5 trillion in 2006 to $16 trillion in 2017. That's less than a third. So And the number of daily newspapers. We had 1,748 daily newspapers in this country in 1970, and we have 1,286 now. So I'm saying all of this well, number one, obviously, I want you to go out and support your local newspaper. I mean, nothing can replace your local newspaper. Your local newspaper goes under, your local news dies. It's that simple. And there are a lot of local newspapers that are hanging by a thread right now. And the reason that is because they're desperate for cash, and they, one after another, fall into this trap where their cash flow is so bad, all they really need right now is money. And a lot of them are still sitting, we're not, but some still are sitting in the old newspaper building. Maybe the press is still in the basement. Chances are it's downtown. And what's happened over and over is that the value of that real estate has eclipsed the value of the newspaper. And so you have companies coming in, the two that are the worst offenders are Gatehouse Media and Alden Global Capital. And what they do is they come in, they buy the newspaper saying, don't worry, your news is going to be fine. In fact, we're going to do a better job, and we're going to do it more efficiently. That's what they always say. And the next thing you know, half the news staff, if not more, is shown the door. The other half is left to try to do twice the work with half the resources. And on top of that, the first thing they do is sell the real estate. And you end up in rented space, nothing even resembling the old traditional newsroom. And then it just implodes. And some newspapers are able to weather that. We've been very fortunate here in Maine with Reed Brower up in Rockland, who owns just about every newspaper in Maine right now, but he's a local guy, and it's working right now. We've pooled all of our resources. So if my column in the Press Herald now appears in the Lewiston Sun Journal and up in Waterville and Augusta, it goes everywhere. And likewise, their stories, we will use them in our paper. So it's, in that sense, there's more content for everyone. I hope this model works. The other model that I would mention, and if you have an opportunity to support it, and that would be the nonprofit news organizations that are springing up. Right now, according to the Institute for Nonprofit News, there are 189 nonprofit news organizations in this country right now. That number is on the rise. And some of them you've heard of, the Texas Tribune, ProPublica, Min Post, which is in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Center for Investigative Reporting here in Maine. We have the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting, which I would wholeheartedly encourage you to donate to, because a good friend of mine is running it, and it's a struggle. It really is. But they're doing the good work, and they're doing the deep dive kind of investigative reporting that we need. So just if you have an opportunity, and if you're looking for something worthwhile to support, number one, subscribe to your local paper. And number two, if you come across one of these nonprofit sites, obviously check them out. But I really think that that's the future. And it hinges on a lot of philanthropy. I'm talking foundation level philanthropy to get some of these things started. But at the same time, it comes down to all of us valuing the news and understanding that, as crazy as the world is, living with the news, try living without it. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? A couple of questions? Okay. I'm sorry I ran over, but any questions?
I want to know what you think of me getting my news from NPR at night, PBS.
Radio or television?
Television news.
The news hour?
The news hour.
Yeah, great show.
Is it factual?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and in depth, they are. I think that's one of the best news programs on television. And that goes back to McNeil Lair. They've been doing it for a long time. And I think, the only problem that show has, and good for you that you watch it, is it is in diametric opposition to the average American attention span, because they get into stories in such depth, and they have conversations, and they have people debate, and they do all those things, which is wonderful. try getting a 28-year-old to watch that. It's tough. But you're getting, if you watch that every night, you are getting excellent news. That's high quality stuff. Yeah, and I would also encourage you to, you live here yeah, so I would encourage you to listen to Maine Public too, because they do a very good job as well. They stole our State House reporter.
I have a personal question to you.
Sure.
Do you miss Paul LePage?
I made it 1 hour and 18 minutes without that. I think I just set a new record. Yeah. Everybody kept saying before he left, "What are you gonna do? What's the farewell column gonna say? You're gonna write him another letter?" And the time came in the end of December, and I couldn't do it. And it was because he was on his way out, and I found this actually in the last 6 months of his term. He just felt like he mattered less and less and less. And so I found that to do something big and grand and ha-ha at the end would actually be antithetical to what was going on, and that is that he can't become a memory fast enough. Of course, that said, now we're going gangbusters with him right now with this story on Sunday about the Trump Hotel. For those who didn't see it, we finally get the Freedom of Information stuff about all of his stays, and it's like $40,000, and everything we thought was true is true. And what does LePage say? Fiction. It's fiction. But at the same time, he uttered 3 words that I have never heard him utter before. He said, "If I spent $1,100 on a hotel room, shame on me." I said, "We have to bronze that." So he's not going anywhere because there's still a market for him, whether he's in Florida or up here. Ken and I want to say Mike, but the WGAN radio will keep having him on. The question is, how long will people keep paying attention? And I, for one, I'm not going to lie. This guy was the best thing that ever happened to me, journalistically. From a column standpoint, it's like, my God. But it got old. It really did. And after about 5-6 years, it was like, how many different ways can you say that someone's, a buffoon? And I ran out. My vocabulary is not that big. So we'll see, but I think he'll be back.
There's an excellent program, TED Talk, on confirmation bias. You should look it up if you haven't heard it.
Good.
Guy Raz on
Yep.
NPR. TED Talk.
I think it's really at the root of so much that's going on right now in terms of why people won't listen to each other. And it's maddening. It really is. Any other questions? Well, thank you all again. You have been a great audience. Really had fun. Thank you. You can keep it. Try it out on your friends.